The Battle of Mons-en-Pévèle, 1304, the engagement defining King Philip IV, fighting without a helmet, commences on a scorched ridge where the air tastes of iron and dust. This clash in the Franco-Flemish War will not just decide the fate of a county, it will push the most powerful monarch in Christendom to the edge of extinction. The Iron King will find himself pinned under his dead horse, staring at the spiked head of a Wagon-Laager club. He will be forced to fight for his life as a commoner, his face fully exposed to the pikes. The humiliation of Courtrai haunts the French court like a physical wound, 2 years after weavers stripped the golden spurs from fallen knights. This deep-seated strategic pressure makes a total erasure of the rebellion the only path for Philip IV. The Flemish militia holds the heights of the Pevelenberg, forming an unbreakable ring of pikes and reinforced wagon-laagers. This structural force is mathematically daunting, numbering 15,000 men who have already proven they can slaughter heavy cavalry. Their defense is a fortress of wood and sharpened steel, perched above the dry plains. Philip IV has already moved his professionalized army into the plains below the hill. He is not waiting for a diplomatic resolution. The Iron King commits to a grueling blockading standoff, betting that the unyielding sun will do the work his knights cannot. He believes his superior crossbowmen and perriers can scientifically dismantle the Flemish through dehydration and psychological attrition. He is wrong about the speed of their surrender. The French perriers begin to pelt the Wagon-Laager with stones, but the Flemish wall remains silent and unmoving. The Pevelenberg becomes a furnace as the morning sun bakes the unshaded slopes. Flemish soldiers in heavy mail habergeons are literally cooking inside their gear, their tongues swelling from a thirst that water cannot reach. Philip of Chieti gives the order to hold the circle despite the murderous canicule. He emerges as the personification of this desperate force, watching his men collapse from heat stroke while the French camp remains near the Saint-Jean fountain. The commander calculates the cost of every passing hour, knowing his supplies are already in French hands. The French king manages a bureaucratic machine capable of devaluing currency and taxing the clergy to fund this campaign of total erasure. This administrative capability makes him a dangerous adversary who views warfare as a matter of logic and resources. Philip of Chieti, however, operates on a fatal assumption. He believes that a single, suicidal strike at the French king's person will instantly collapse the royal state and end the war. He calculates for a decapitation strike, assuming the French center will shatter if the monarch falls. The gap between his expectation and reality is widening. Philip of Chieti decides that if his men are to die of thirst, they will die in the king's own pavilion. He gives the command to abandon the defensive heights and prepare for an impossible descent. This decision sets the battle's trajectory toward a bloody sunset collision that neither side anticipated. The command is given in the fading light of late afternoon, just as the French begin to believe the day's fighting has finished. The commitment is absolute. There is no secondary plan for a retreat back to the waterless hill. The scorched, unshaded Pevelenberg hill is a landscape of dehydration and grim silence. Men are seen drinking their own urine as the heat reaches its peak, their pikes trembling in sweat-slicked hands. This terrain is a trap that forces the Flemish to choose between a slow death by the sun or a fast death by the sword. The French knights in the plain below remain in their saddles, their heavy lances glinting in the dying light. The distance between the two armies is a dry stretch of earth that will soon turn into a graveyard. 12,000 Flemish militia stand in their Wagon-Laager, facing 3,000 knights and 10,000 French infantry. The deployment is a study in medieval asymmetry, a wall of commoners against the flower of chivalry. The French crossbowmen rotate their units to keep them fresh, maintaining a steady rain of bolts against the Flemish front. The tension of the held breath precedes the final movement of the day. This is the last moment of order before the death charge transforms the battlefield into a chaotic melee that ignores all traditional rules. The first Flemish charge is not a maneuver. It is a fanatical eruption that catches the French unarmored and negotiating. Philip IV's original plan of attrition fails at the very moment his knights begin unlacing their helmets for the night. The fatal turn engages as the Bruges fighters bypass the primary formations and head directly for the royal center. The promise of French dominance appears impossible to fulfill as the French camp dissolves into smoke and screaming. The king's personal guard is cut down, leaving him exposed in his own pavilion. The Battle of Mons-en-Pévèle 1304 ignites as the Oriflamme banner is trampled into the dust by commoners. The point of no return arrives when the Flemish pikes breach the heart of the French camp. The king's worst fear is now visibly in motion. The Iron King is pinned under his dead horse, his face exposed to the coming blow. A Gurdendag club swings toward the most powerful man in Europe, its iron spike aimed at his unprotected skull. Philip commits despite the collapsing defense, drawing his arming sword to fight from the ground. The battle evolves as French knights throw themselves between the Flemish pikes and their fallen monarch. These men pay with their lives to buy the French state a few more seconds of survival. One by one, the knights are cut down, but they successfully pull the unhelmeted king from beneath his dead mount. The mechanism of the outcome begins to reveal itself in this desperate sacrifice. Philip IV refuses to retire to safety, instead calling for a new horse and rallying his breaking infantry with his bare face exposed. The moment of maximum uncertainty arrives as the French camp burns around the king. Philip finds himself surrounded, leading a countercharge with his sword drawn and his face fully vulnerable to the Flemish Gurdendags. His infantry is fleeing, and the royal center is a slaughterhouse of unarmored men. This is second reversal of the battle, moving from the king's rescue to the brink of his total defeat. He is a monarch reduced to a foot soldier, fighting for his own life in the middle of a collapsing defense. Philip IV knows that if he falls, the centralization of France dies with him. He misreads nothing at this exact moment, choosing to lead the charge himself, rather than delegate the command. The antagonist's fatal assumption is visibly in play. The Flemish believe the king is already dead or fleeing. Philip of Chieti's men become bogged down in the loot of the royal tents, their coordination shattering just as the king regroups his flanks. The king remains in the melee, his unhelmeted presence acting as a desperate beacon for his remaining heavy cavalry. The outcome becomes mathematically inevitable when John Wack of Namur misreads the smoke and begins a premature withdrawal of the Flemish left wing. This fatal gap leaves the center uncoordinated and vulnerable to a flanking strike. The moment the antagonist's fatal assumption is destroyed arrives when the French heavy cavalry slams into the sides of the uncoordinated Flemish mass. William of Jülich, the soul of the charge, is cut down and killed in the counterattack. The dramatic irony is resolved as the Flemish death charge collapses into a bloody retreat. The field of Mons-en-Pévèle goes silent as the sun finally sets over thousands of dead. The most counterintuitive consequence is revealed. Many of the fallen did not die from wounds, but from the unyielding heat that cooked them in their mail. French losses are catastrophic for a victory, with 300 high-ranking knights lost in the camp melee. The Iron King remains on the field, his face streaked with soot and blood, looking at the lost Oriflamme. The cost of the victory is a shock that will echo through Paris. The Flemish military structure suffers a blow from which it cannot recover, losing its primary leaders and 7,000 seasoned militiamen. The psychological collapse follows the retreat toward Lille as the French occupy Douai and burn the strategic town of Seclin. This disintegration is not just military, but political. The rebel heartland is left defenseless against the Iron King's revenge. The hours after the battle reveal a landscape of abandoned wagons and wounded men left to the mercy of the French pursuit. The spirit of 1302 is broken. The political shockwave of the victory leads directly to the Treaty of Athis-sur-Orge, where Philip IV imposes his final will. Lille, Douai, and Béthune are annexed to France, stripping Flanders of its primary textile centers. The Iron King demands 400,000 pond in reparations, a sum designed to ensure the county never challenges the crown again. This is the last declarative act before the legacy is weighed. The victory re-establishes the prestige of the French king, providing the political capital for his later moves against the papacy and the Templars. Could the French monarchy have survived if Philip IV had been killed by a commoners' club in his own tent? So why does the world remember the defeat at Courtrai, while the victory that saved the Capetian state is often forgotten? The question is not just about a battle, but about the survival of the centralized state itself. If the Iron King had died without his helmet that day, the map of Europe and the history of the 100 Years' War would be unrecognizable. Did the extreme financial burdens of the 1305 treaty make the next generation of Flemish rebellion inevitable? And what does a king do once he has proven that the age of the knight can still crush the revolution of the pike? The debt imposed on the Flemish guilds created an internal class conflict that would burn for decades. The story of Mons-en-Pévèle is the opening chapter of a cycle of violence that would eventually lead to the massive peasant revolt of 1323. The victory at Mons-en-Pévèle was the bloody correction to the shock of 1302, ensuring the French monarchy survived its most dangerous hour. Philip IV secured his throne and his legacy, but at the cost of a catastrophic human toll and a simmering Flemish resentment. King Philip IV lived to consolidate his power and move against his enemies, while the Flemish leaders were either dead or imprisoned. The road from this treaty runs directly to the peasant revolt of 1323, a final desperate rebellion against the crushing debt of the Iron King's peace. The road from the Pevelenberg runs directly to the peasant revolt of Flanders and to a series of guild uprisings that will once again test the French crown. Subscribe to stay with this series. The next engagement is already in production. If you are watching on a television screen, the QR code on screen now will take you directly to the subscribe button on your phone.